February 11th brings Thaddeus Thunderbolt Ross to Marvel Snap. Right now he's solid, but I'm calling it, this card will be absolutely broken in the future. I'll break down why, revisit Joaquin Torres, dive into theory-crafted decks, and discuss Blink and Nebula. Let's see why Ross is a time bomb waiting to explode. The review on Joaquin Torres Falcon is he is good in just a very specific deck. Otherwise, if you don't really like that deck, if you don't like holding your one cost until later in the game, it did come out that you can pair him, of course, with Black Swan to help ease some of that burden. But otherwise, I'm fine passing on the card. I did pass on the card. I will, of course, continue to pass on the card as I save my resources. He's just not impressive enough, not powerful enough for me to warrant spending my resources. So, if you like his specific type of decks, then you probably should get him. But otherwise, if you stay away from the more bounce type, the more zoo-ish type, one cost, of course, decks, then he is an easy skip. This is the full lineup. Of course, we have Thaddeus Thunderbolt Ross, who I will dig into in full detail. Blink isn't that popular of a card, but she shows up in a handful of different decks. And then there is Nebula, who used to be the strongest one-cost card. She definitely has competition in that slot now, but she still has her uses. So Thaddeus Thunderbolt Ross allows you to draw through your deck. Now, it is opponent controlled, but you've also now put your opponent into a very difficult position, where if they want to deny you this draw, they need to play on curve. They need to use the full amount of energy for each turn that Thaddeus Thunderbolt Ross is on the board. And so at a minimum, you can force your opponent to play in a different style, play different cards than they actually would want to. And if they don't, just getting one or two cards getting drawn out of your deck is just so strong and makes your deck even that much more consistent. And even if you're not going to play the cards you draw, now when you draw organically, you are drawing cards that you can play on those turns. This card, of course, gets worse the later you play him. But if he's a turn 2 play, it can be super powerful. And some of us remember turn 2 Loki in Erisham, which was super powerful. And that is where I am leading with Thunderbolt Ross. When paired with an upcoming card who, if you're living under a rock or you avoid spoilers, then you may not be aware of the synergy he will have, which I will dive into in a specific spoiler section. But for now, the current release, I think Thaddeus will be a good or decent card. There are many turns where players do not use their full energy. It happens a lot more than you might think. And again, in those matchups, just being able to draw an additional 1 or 2 cards is going to be powerful. Out of the gate, this card will be decent at a minimum. But in the future, he will be busted on the level Loki was in Erisham. So here are the 23 cards that are currently 10 power or above when they are in your deck without any other cards assisting that. So honestly, there aren't too many decks that you can construct here. The ones that jump out to me are a Scar Surtur. Those have a lot of big power cards. A Hela, potentially. Those have a lot of big power cards. Sauron has a couple of cards here, and others you could kind of mix and match. High Evo. So I think those are going to be the basis. You also could splash Thunderbolt Ross into decks where you want to guarantee you draw a big power card. There are things like Dracula Dump, maybe a move deck, you guarantee you get Heimdall, are almost guaranteed based on your opponent, of course. Thanos, baby. You can pull out additional cards in addition to the stones. So there are going to be some different decks that pop up that are going to try to use Thunderbolt Ross. Now, will he be the most powerful currently? Again, I'm not super convinced. I think he will be decent. He might have one outstanding use case. My thought mainly goes into the Scar Sorter deck immediately. But I will delay right now. There are spoilers coming up, and I will dive into the exact reason why I think that this card will be on a broken level when paired with another card. I have delayed enough. If you want to avoid spoilers, skip to the next timestamp. All of my videos have them. But now, time for spoiler territory. Big Bad Legendary Isan. Now, if this card stays as it is, already people are super excited for this card. This thing's going to warp the meta like Arishem did. Everybody's planning on getting this card. Be prepared to be sick of them. So who knows if I'll be able to come up with a unique deck, honestly, for this card. That said, you at the start of the game are giving all of your cards +2. That means the graphic I just showed with those 23 cards, that is even longer now, because now you can extend that down to 8 power cards coming into the game. So you can include an 8 power card, Gladiator, a 9 power card, something like a Gilgamesh or maybe even a Century, and really start to, in addition to the 10, 11, and 12 power cards. So now with Thaddeus Thunderbolt Ross, who becomes a 2/4 in this deck, now you just are drawing cards that you can play early, cards that you can play late, and just drawing through a ton of your deck. Again, depending on your opponent, but I think that people shouldn't be sleeping on that. At a minimum, it's going to warp the meta and cause people to have to build decks that play on curve, that use their full energy. And I don't know if that's going to be enough, because all of the cards in this Isan deck get +2. So that might be hard to sort out during Isan's release week and maybe the month. Because this card, I think, is going to be the same as Arishem, where you're going to see cards nerfed around him. It's going to be a complete battle zone, warfield. And cards are going to get nuked left and right while they leave Isan untouched. All of this is speculative, because right now, as this card is printed, I don't know anybody who thinks this card is going to be weak on his own. Throw Thaddeus Thunderbolt Ross into the mix, and I don't see how you stop that deck, because card draw is so powerful. And even if I'm able to draw an additional card with all this bonus energy, it's a wrap, and people are going to throw a fit over this deck.
You were my brother. I loved you.
With Isan and Thunderbolt Ross, just like they threw a fit with Arishem and Loki. So I do anticipate nerfs in the future. So you might not be able to play that deck for very long, but also it will be super powerful when it comes out, and I do not want to be left behind. That is why I will be getting Thunderbolt Ross now. It isn't to make a deck video on him now. I'll just keep him in my collection until Isan comes out and go to town. The other feature card worth mentioning is Agamotto, which is 12 power, which means Thunderbolt Ross can yank him out of the deck, because Agamotto shuffles X amount of cards into your deck. So being able to draw out some of your other cards so you can draw into those additional spells. We don't know what those spells are, how many Agamotto shuffles into the deck, so this is super unknown. So there's no way to evaluate Thunderbolt Ross's synergy with Agamotto, but it's worth mentioning. And also along those lines, future card releases will of course help Thunderbolt Ross, as you can construct decks that really feed into that ability. So the future is very bright for Thaddeus Thunderbolt Ross. we are officially out of spoiler territory. No more talk for the rest of the video on that. Now, the Series 2 version, you don't have many options, so I stuffed what I'm pretty sure is every single 10 power card that is in Series 2 and below into this deck. You can do the Heimdall Juke. That's really what this deck leans into, maybe, depending. You have other powerful cards like Vision and Spider-Woman. Medusa is just fantastic at, I think, at any level you're at. A 2/5 is just good value. You have America Chavez to hopefully tag one of your 8 power cards in your deck. Maybe Thaddeus Thunderbolt Ross goes off that turn, pulls it off the top of your deck, and now you draw into another card. That was my thought there. Nakia and Okoye, for any series level you're at, those will help Thaddeus Thunderbolt Ross to a degree because now you can get 9 power cards to hit that mark. Shang-Chi, you'll need to be able to combat other big power cards from your opponent. Iceman for some disruption. I don't think the Series 2 version is all that great just because there aren't any options. So let's move on to the Series 3 version. Series 3, like I hinted before, I went with a Sauron build. There are a decent number of 10 cost cards you can use. The Heimdall Juke is present here as well. We have She-Hulk if you ever skip a turn. Enchantress can take care of any negative downsides in Red Skull, Lizard, and Typhoid Mary if you can't get out your Sauron. Shang-Chi is just my boy. Okoye buffs cards in your deck, so that gets Spider-Man 2099 to 10 power. Spider-Man 2099 also works with Heimdall. Ebony Maw is just fantastic in a Sauron deck. You should always be running him if you're doing that. And this is the Series 3 version. I wanted to go a little unique with the No Limits version. So I am leaning into a Storm Lockdown War Machine type deck. We have 3 10 power cards in Crossbones, Cull, and Scar, which can all be played alongside War Machine. If you are drawing those cards out of your deck, you're more likely to draw into your War Machine or Doom 2099. Shang-Chi, we've already covered, is my boy. We have Zabu and Psylocke because we have a decent amount of 4-cost cards in here. And being able to just get this card draw, even 1 card draw out of this deck, you should draw into enough of what you need to make it work, unless you're bottom decking, which every deck does at some point. But otherwise, I think this has potential. Maybe not in the first week, depending on how popular Thunderbolt Ross actually is. But maybe this does turn into a deck video if I try out this deck and it actually turns out to be good. Blink has her uses. You don't see her often, but she is useful in making sure your decks are consistent. So something like Hela can use her. There are Jubilee. There's Ramp, getting your Electro out of the way so you can play more than 1 card and flip the Electro into a 4 cost or higher. So there are some strong uses for Blink. And if you get her, you can find uses for her depending on the specific decks you like to play. But mostly she goes in these lower power cards that have a higher cost into something that's even higher cost, but also higher power. Nebula's use has also fallen a little bit, but overall, she still has her uses. She is good as far as control goes. Your opponents almost always want to play into that Nebula lane to keep her from scaling. So she can work in very off-meta Jean Grey decks, which I've used before. You can go with Rocket and Groot as well, because people want to play into that lane. Any of the Guardians, actually, because it's a safer bet that people want to play into that lane. She goes with Goblins, because now you can fill up that lane. Galactus to have them play in Nebula's lane and keep a lane free for your Goblins and Galactus. So there are definitely some strong uses for her, again, depending on the specific decks you like to play. And overall, she is competitive at that 1-cost slot. I'm not even going to ask the obvious question. Of course, I'm getting Thaddeus Thunderbolt Ross for the reasons I laid out that were in the spoiler section and the non-spoiler section. I think the future is super bright for this card, that I don't care how it does during release week. This card will be strong. I am as confident as I've been about anything that this card will be strong in the future.
This is your worst take ever.
Give it roughly a month. I didn't do the dates. I don't do math on this channel, but I am convinced he will be super strong. So of course, I have no choice but to get this card. So to recap, Thunderbolt Ross is a strong card, good card, maybe not immediately, but I am marking it with a stamp of approval. Blink is a good card. Now this is dependent on the decks you like to play, but in those decks, she is a good card, and she also is hard to replace in those decks. So she gets my seal of approval as well. And Nebula is another good card. So if you don't have these cards, honestly, this is a fantastic spotlight week. Of course, if you have the cards, I just hope you've been saving your resources. If you want to wait until the future that I am referring to comes to pass, maybe you wait and spend tokens on Thunderbolt Ross. I think he's going to be that good, but also, if he's that good, he's going to be nerfed, so you don't want to spend your tokens on him. So, that's a little bit of a dicey situation. I'll let you make that call based on your resources. But otherwise, I am using my keys. I have plenty of keys at this point, especially after the compensation that the US players received. So I will be using the keys. The Blink and Nebula Spotlight variants are okay. I think the Nebula one's better. Hopefully I get Thunderbolt Ross with my first key, but I will be using keys to get Thunderbolt Ross. Thanks for reaching the end of the video. I know I said I don't want this channel to grow, but it does help the channel grow, and I appreciate it. And of course, a special thank you to every single member of the channel. You also contribute to this channel's growth, and it is just a very cool thing as a side project. Maybe turns full-time. Let me know if this is just another one of my bad takes. I have plenty of them, believe me. And until next time. And on one hand, as a creator, it stinks that I broadcast this because I wanted to keep it a secret, but it seems like such an obvious idea that I'm like, well, somebody's got to realize this eventually. So I'll put it in this preview video and broadcast it to the world. Hopefully my channel stays small so it remains a secret. Stop liking and subscribing to my videos.
I unsubscribed 6 months ago.